Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. And I'm George Binns. And the subject this evening is we're going to talk about the state of the city. And who better to tell us all about it than Scott Houseman, the city councilor from Ward 4.
Good morning, Scott.
George. So we prepped this show a while back talking about what do we want to talk about, and I guess one of the things we both are interested in is how the tax system works. And the last time you were on the program, you gave us a pretty good lecture on essentially the city spends every cent of the tax money to pay for things that are ongoing, and anytime we want to do something new and different, we depend upon new growth money. That's still the story?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe it quite that way,
Okay.
but new growth is certainly a big part of the sort of fiscal management picture for municipal finance. So I guess I would describe it this way. When the administration builds a budget that the council reviews, there are sort of two ways to build a municipal budget. Department of Revenue and our own sort of financial policies and objectives document that the council and the mayor have adopted says that we should really do it one particular way. It's the recommended way. So the two ways are you figure out exactly how much money you think you're going to have, and you build a budget that is that has the same numbers. You have a balanced budget. Yeah. The downside of that is if you fall short in your revenues, now you have to talk about midstream in your fiscal year, cutting back on services or expenses. The other way, which is the way that we do it, is we estimate revenues and we build a budget that spends less than estimated revenues, so that we're always being conservative in our estimates. If we have extra money, that's fine, right?
It's the rainy day fund.
Yeah, well, it allows us to have a rainy day fund, because without that, you couldn't build a rainy day fund. So that is one component of the budget building process when you're trying to figure out what your bottom line numbers are. Mm-hmm. The other component of that is what we call new growth, which is comprised of, to a large extent, there are other components, but to a large extent, I just think of it as like building permits, new development. The building permits that come in, whether it's a home renovation or a new building, on Rantoul Street or wherever, also generates additional revenue that is not part of the tax revenue that comes into the city. Yeah. So on a given year, that new growth number fluctuates somewhere between 800,000 and, say, $1.2 million, something like that. Okay. And you never know how much it's going to be. It's not in the city's control.
What's the total city budget?
If you include enterprise funds, it's around 170 million.
So we're talking about 1 to 2% of the total budget.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But that extra amount in new growth each year is what allows us to catch up on arrearages in pension funds, the monies that we owe, allow us to put money into the rainy day fund that you talked about, allow us to build, purchase additional equipment or build a new police station, that sort of thing. Yeah. So structurally, if the city only had the revenues that come from property tax, that are limited to 2.5 a year, fiscal year, we wouldn't be doing and be able to do as much as we do. That additional new growth that comes in to some degree, that's that 800,000 to 1.2 million roughly, is key to the city being able to do certain things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And it also becomes part of the basis, the tax basis for the next year. So the new growth is let's say a new building. Now you have you've increased the base upon which the property taxes are made from. So one other thing I want to say, so because of the way the system in Beverly is structured to build a municipal finance is why, in large part, we were able, in our last fiscal year, to not raise taxes to 2.5%. We only raised it to 1.5%.
Well, that gets me into another one of my favorites.
Bear with me. And then this year, the tax rate we adopted does not go to full 2.5%. It goes, I think, to 2.25%. So when the city is well managed on a fiscal basis, it provides the opportunity to not always go to the full 2.5% tax rate.
Well,
that's a long answer.
I know.
Sorry about that.
That gets me to my other favorite subject.
Okay.
I started watching my taxes the last couple of years, and yeah, it sounds good that we only had 1% the year before, and not going to go the full 2.5%. But I'm looking at my assessment, and whoa, my assessment went up 9.91%.
Yeah.
Which sounds pretty good. Except
well,
when I went in and looked at Zillow,
yeah, they
said my house deteriorated by 4.06%. And the area we're in, 01915, the average was down 2.4% year over year. So the disconnect that I'm struggling with is how does the commercial world think that the values of the property around here is deteriorating despite the peak is over, and yet the assessors keep pushing it up. So that's 2 years in a row they have essentially increased the assessment, and that's where all this extra tax money is coming from.
I don't know where, or I don't know what the algorithm or the system is that Zillow uses for figuring out their property values, but from what I understand and observe, if you were to sell a house now in Beverly or in our neck of the woods, Ward 4, the value of houses have skyrocketed. So the assessors, the assessment process is done on an annualized basis, and it also is backward-looking a year. So the assessment that you see today is based upon what was done January of last year by the assessors. So there is a lag effect, which might explain if you did a current Zillow, you're comparing it to figures from a year ago. But be that as it may, I can't speak to either the methodology the assessors use or the methodology that Zillow uses.
Yeah.
But our taxes are based upon a systematized statewide process of assessors going in and evaluating property. So, again, I can't speak to what Zillow says, but based upon my observations right now, Zillow's is not either accurate or it's only measuring the last couple of weeks where interest rates have gone up a lot, and it's really put a dampening effect on the market activity in retail sales for housing.
So that I think this is one of the things that, in trying to reach transparency, I think this is one of the things that I would like to see better explained.
Well, I am glad you asked that question, George. So let me. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm very excited about this.
Okay.
So.
Hit your hot button. Okay.
You did, yeah. So, as I mentioned, I've been on the chair of financial forecasting for a number of years, not presently this year. But one of the things that we have really in that committee for the last 3 years pushed very hard on, and the council at large for sure has also done this when we've spoken with the administration, and that is, listen, we build our budget. So I'm chair of finance and property this term. I've been chair before. We get a big, thick booklet. It's full of every line item that the city spends its money on.
Yep.
Okay? The general public, it's a fairly obtuse document, okay, and certainly is not transparent. And to the general lay public, it is anything but user-friendly. So we have been pushing the administration to make a more transparent, more user-friendly budget document so that the general public can look at how municipal finance works and understand what the heck is going on. Mm-hmm. We have not had that to date. But the council did, so we sort of collaborated with the administration on this. The finance department needed, the finance director needed an additional position because they were sort of struggling. And an assistant finance director was hired. That has allowed the finance director and the administration to enter into a contract with a company called ClearGov. And we will now, this year, for the very first time, have a new user-friendly budget posted on our website, which will be interactive for the public. And it will not look at all like the sort of traditional document the council gets. So we will have, this is actually breaking news because my fellow colleagues don't know this yet.
Okay.
We will have our standard traditional document, but we will also have this sort of graphically oriented, interactive, web-based budget document, which will actually be used as part of the budget process. If you want an example of it, you can go to Medford, and Medford has the same contract with this, or similar contract with the same company, and it has on their website a very, so instead of line by line, we're going to spend X number of money on buying salt for the DPW, right? It will have pie charts, bar charts, narratives. It will have goals and objectives by department and so forth. And so I would hope as part of that,
we see this?
It's going to be rolled out as part of this budget process.
Okay.
So we will see it by end of May, beginning of June.
Okay.
All right. So hopefully that will go a long way towards helping you and other citizens in Beverly feel like they really can get access to the information on how their tax dollars are spent.
Yeah. Well, one of the other big issues, in fact, you're going to a meeting tonight at City Hall on the subject of what the zoning ought to say about building height.
Yeah.
And so far, it sounds like, we can put a 3-story limit on everything. That runs into somewhat of a snag when you start talking about Ward 5, especially. Because that's an industrial area, and a 3-story building in an industrial area could be a no-brainer, or it could be a killer of the project. So it's not that simple, I think. And I looked at the summary that the planning department puts out, and it's kind of complicated, but one of the things that looks like you can take a 3-decker and take each one of those floors and subdivide it into 2, and now you got 6 occupants in what used to be a 3-decker.
6 units, yeah.
I'm not sure that's really what we want. How is this thing going to go down?
Well, it's up to 8 other colleagues and myself to take votes on the various proposals that are out. Yeah. So,
what's your favorite?
Well, I'll tell you, because I submitted some amendments to the administration's proposal. So, so just a little bit of in the weeds process. Bringing forward, as Councillor St. Hilaire did, a proposal, as you described, to limit all new buildings in Beverly to 3 stories or 35 feet. That is sort of a procedural step to sort of prompt the discussion, because a single city councilor cannot, from a process point of view, put on the table a zoning change. It has to come from the administration or from the council as a whole. And there is not support on the council as a whole for that particular proposal. But what is on the table, and what that proposal did sort of prompt, was a set of amendments to our zoning ordinance from the administration. And there are a number of components to what was proposed. Part of it is the tall building overlay, which largely affects Rantoul Street. Part of it is zoning along Cabot Street and sort of a creation of a new subzone that says, or would provide for an opportunity to zone Cabot Street a little bit differently than Rantoul Street.
How differently?
Well, right now, Cabot Street, well, I'll take them one at a time. The Rantoul Street sort of tall building overlay, the administration's amendment would be to remove the tall building overlay, which would lower how tall buildings could be along Rantoul Street by 2 stories.
So Rantoul Street will no longer be 70 feet; it'll be
correct
35 feet.
No, that's not contemplated. It would, I believe, it would go down to 55 feet. So in other words, lop 2 stories off. And that's where a lot of the new growth is, and a lot of the controversy has been about, and new growth, including what I described about,
that's
the budget.
TOD.
Yeah, transit-oriented development.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So along Cabot Street, the planning department proposed sort of a sub-district of the commercial district, which would say that along Cabot Street, what is presently allowed is, by zoning, are building heights up to 55 feet.
Yep. So
that would be the same as Rantoul Street with the removal of the tall building ordinance. It would make them basically treated the same.
Yeah.
The administration has proposed that within that subzone, instead of the 55 feet, it would be lowered to 45 feet. In other words, lop off 1 story to keep it sort of user-friendly for discussion purposes. And basically using height as a way of addressing people's concerns about maintaining the character along Cabot Street. I have proposed, and tonight there'll be a discussion about my proposal as well as the administration's proposal. I've proposed only for lots that front on Cabot Street, not lots further behind Cabot Street, that only for lots that are along Cabot Street, a 35-foot limit. In other words, 3 stories, or if you were to go to a 4-story building, that the 4-story would have to have a bumped up percentage of affordable housing. So it could be done, but you would have to include more affordable housing in that. So it's really around the margins of, do we want to stay with 55 feet on Cabot Street? Do we want to lower it to 45 feet? Or do we want to lower it to 35 feet just for those lots that are that front on Cabot Street? So, for example...
Well, technically, Cabot Street is in the TOD district.
Yes.
So there is the so-called encouragement to produce lots of housing in that area. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the housing is going to be really what you can bring in people from Boston to take over.
Yeah, so this is actually a huge...
We're talking really a high-rent district.
Yeah, well, this is really a complex and large subject that is very important because, for example, the assessments on your tax bill that went way, way, way up is a reflection of a housing crisis in the state where people are being, having a hard time, new folks who want to buy a house, not being able to afford it. So what's part of this? So that is part of the broader context of this conversation about Cabot Street. At least as to Cabot Street, which is what I've really focused on. Yeah. My proposal, in my opinion, would still allow a 45-foot, which is what the administration is proposing, a building 45 feet behind the stores that front on Cabot Street. So, for example, the building that used to be known as Casa de Moda, right, that was put up behind it, would still be allowed under my proposal. That's up to 4 stories. Yeah. The Family Dollar building that has stirred up a lot of controversy.
It's going to be 5 stories.
that would also still be allowed under my proposal, because I'm only talking about 3 stories on parcels that front Cabot Street, not on parcels that are directly behind. So that building that would be behind Family Dollar would still be able to be built under my proposal, just as the administrations would as well.
Yeah. Well, that gets to the other part of this issue you brought up of, you got a rider in there that says if you do more than the usual affordable housing, then you can take advantage of the height. And one of my main concerns is the vibrant city that everybody wants to talk about, or the vibrant downtown, depends upon people working essentially minimum wage. So that so-called affordable housing is not something they can afford.
Well, yeah, so there's a market affordable housing.
The other half of the game is there's usually a rider in there that says, and oh, by the way, if you don't want to actually build the affordable housing here, put some money in the kitty.
Yeah.
And
that's also one of the proposals, yeah.
And having some of the discussion with Andrew DeFrenza, who's really active in this business, that's nice, he's got money in the kitty, but where does he buy the land to put something up? So there gets to be this, it sounds like a good idea, but it never happens.
So your question has a number of different factors which really it sort of represents the complexity of this subject.
Yeah.
And so there are sort of the 50,000-foot conceptual questions here, which is, how do you address a housing crisis? How do you make sure that people who are working maybe at minimum wage along Cabot Street actually get to live in Beverly rather than having to commute from outside the city? Yeah. That's a 50,000-foot question about why in Hamilton and Wenham and Manchester by the Sea and Rowley, why they do not have zoning that allows more housing. So Beverly has been on the forefront, the leading edge of building more housing, both affordable and market rate. But the proposal that's before us tonight is really a proposal that focuses, in terms of my attention in particular, on what do we want Cabot Street to look like 50 years from now. And you want to make sure, because remember, we have the entire city to build in.
Yeah.
Okay? Do we want Cabot Street to look like Rantoul Street? Or do we think Cabot Street should be treated and thought of differently? The master plan process said yes. And at least anecdotally, my understanding from what I hear, and frankly, my own personal desire, is that the essential sort of pedestrian street level experience and feel of Cabot Street should be retained, and we don't need to convert Cabot Street into Rantoul Street. I like the fact that that these two streets are different, and that there's something worth trying to preserve along Cabot Street in terms of essential character without basically a moratorium, and still allowing some kind of organic growth over time.
What do you think?
Which is what my proposal would.
What do you think is the central character of Rantoul Street and the central character of Cabot Street?
Yeah. So the planning board had a very long and thoughtful process and discussion just around all of these questions.
Yeah.
I actually listened to it on BevCam. A shout out to BevCam. It's a wonderful resource and public service to the city, because I can't always go to all the meetings because, when the planning board had their meeting, I was at a different meeting. So I was able to go back to BevCam and spend 2.5 hours listening to the planning board debate all of these topics.
What's your take on what's the character of Cabot Street? What are we trying to save?
What we're trying to save is a more human scale, I think. I mean, so one of the planning board members talked about, well, all of them did to some degree, that it's a subjective feel. How do you capture in objective terms and regulate objectively with, story height and so forth? How do you use that objective standard to regulate a subjective concern, which is, well, does it feel different when you walk down Rantoul Street? than it does, and you're surrounded by, buildings that are 5, 6, 7 stories tall, and a long corridor, if you will, of buildings on either side that are like that. Does it feel different? Is your human experience different than if you're walking along Cabot Theater and Organic Cafe and Chianti and Atomic Cafe and along the churches? Is there a different feel? I think there really is a different feel, and the difference really comes from a difference in scale that you experience sort of immediately in the buildings next to you. Well, I don't know if that's. I mean, so it's really hard to capture in words, which is why this is such a difficult conversation that requires a nuanced approach.
Well, that gets to be the heart of the problem. We've got a concept of the character of the city.
Yeah.
I've asked lots of different political figures what that means. Yeah. And I've heard everything from clapboards to short buildings.
Yeah, it's an architectural concept in large part.
The most meaningful concept I got was from Wes Slate.
Okay.
He said the character of Beverly is change, and if you think about what used to be on the south end of Rantoul Street, it was a mill town. It was a factory
100%.
district.
Yeah.
And now it's condos.
Yeah.
So it's constantly changing. So it's hard to pin down what the character is right now. And yet we've got all these issues, TOD and housing that is affordable. The way I'd like to see it is anybody that works in Beverly can afford to live here. And when they went through the planning session, they did not come up with a supply and demand curve. So, as far as I can tell, we have no idea what the real problem is. So, what this is going to get down to is we've had a half hour of fun. And
I wish we could talk longer, George.
Maybe we ought to do this again and continue this discussion.
I would be happy to do it.
So, any last words for the audience from you as to what's going to happen in the near future?
Well, the vote tonight, the vote that the council takes, is going to be determinative of what happens, and that those votes may not happen immediatly. They may happen over the course of the next month or so. I don't know how my colleagues are going to vote and how they're going to view it. All of us agree that Beverly needs to have the ability to change over time, and that is going to happen no matter what we settle on, including my sort of more restrictive proposal for a short section of Cabot Street. Change will occur. Change is a good thing, as long as we can, in some respects, hang on to those things that are sort of precious that we love about Beverly at the same time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching us this evening. And this is going to be an ongoing discussion for quite some time with the City Council in general. And we've got a lot of issues coming up besides the height limitations someplace around the city, as well as what happens to the city charter, which is another issue that we're going to have to get to one of these nights. So thanks again for watching, and stay tuned.